Thomas Keneally, considered a living national treasure, and who is most commonly known for writing Schindler's Ark, the book Steven Spielberg eventually turned into Schindler's List, visited UOW recently, and UOWTV was able to sit down with him.
Deal being called a national living treasure. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a very un-Australian institution to put in place. So there is one side of Australians and one side of the recipients who think that it's a one-line joke, given our traditions of egalitarianism. And there's also the side that says, well, I'm really pleased with this, but I've got to be cool about it. I've got to... And it is true, it doesn't alter the quality of your life, your breath, your anything, but it's undeniably, if people take it seriously, God bless them. And
so, are you still enjoying your writing now?
Very much. The book I'm writing now, I've had all the problems I had with earlier books. When you first begin a book, you don't quite know what belongs in it. You have a vague idea of where people are going to travel in the book, but you don't know what quite belongs in it, what will have to be edited out later, and you're not as good as you will be later of seeing the connections between characters, the organic connections. So the first draft tends to be one damn thing after another, and then by the second draft it's starting to make sense, and you're really starting to enjoy your observations of the characters and the connection between events. And by the third draft, where I am now, you're really enjoying it. So within the limits of the fact that you'll always be a bit bewildered in the first draft, the reason you're always a bit bewildered and you don't quite know where it's going and where the characters will come from is because so much of what's supplied in a novel comes from the subconscious. It emerges because you're consciously writing, doing your best to put material down and to make connections, but the enlightenment, the solutions are all in the subconscious, the solutions by which you make the connections between people are, and you can only engage it by writing. So you've got to keep on writing even though you're uncertain about it in the first draft. Within the limitations that that's the case, I'm really enjoying writing, yeah. And I don't take being bewildered early in a novel as a sign that I should get another job. Not at my age anyhow, because it's the normal process.
If you weren't writing, what do you think you'd be doing with your time?
I reckon I'd try to paint if I weren't writing. I was always attracted to the law. I might have been a lawyer, but I think I would have tried to take up painting. So very self-destructive streak. Writing is one form of self-destruction, painting is another.
And so a lot of your work comes from historical context. I was just hoping I could ask your opinion on a few of the big issues at the moment. The first one would be Australia's got a lot of talk at the moment about refugees. What's your thoughts on that at the moment?
Well, I think our refugee policy is a national disgrace and is damaging the people who are caught in its moils. I feel that we can maintain our security, as other countries can, without offshore processing and without punitive measures, locking people up and making them wish they'd never tried it. The whole thing is that we've got to create a process by which people who pool in Indonesia and Malaysia can be processed. We're not seriously addressing that issue of cooperating with other countries in a positive way to make sure that that mass of people do move, not only to Australia but to many countries throughout the world. When I was a little kid, we had a situation that there were 8 million people in displaced persons camps in Europe as a result of the World War II. They didn't have documents, and we had to find, or someone had to find places for them throughout the world, and they did. We didn't demonize them. We didn't try to punish them for who they were. We set to and found places for them. Australia took 170,000 out of that 8 million. And Canada would have taken 300,000, and America took a lot more, etc., etc. Britain, South Africa, New Zealand, a certain number. And, you know, I don't think we can declare ourselves a fortress and say, we're going to stop this, because the pressure is so great. There's so many refugees being created by the Islamic State events. There's so many refugees coming into Jordan. There's more refugees coming into Italy in 2 weeks than there is in 6 months in Australia. And yet they don't demonize them. We demonize them, and therefore it makes it legitimate to punish them. So this is the I think indefensible, and it shows that what Manning Clark said about it is true. There is in Australians a great enlarging tendency, and then there's a great narrowing down and stricting, you do this or else sort of tendency. And it's the narrowing down tendency that's occurring now that is so dominant in our nature. The other thing is that the world has changed in the last little while. Since we've taken on the Islamic State, this is a huge battle, and it creates the problem that we have to retain the fraternity of the Muslims in Australia. And I don't think the federal government is doing a good job of showing that they're on the side of the Islamic immigrant to Australia. They're not doing a good enough. I feel they're dog whistling racism as they go about addressing the question of the Islamic State. And so I think we're suddenly in a situation where maintaining cohesion amongst our people is going to become a big issue, because I'm sure there are lots of Muslims out there upset about assumptions that this government has made about them. Even though they say there are many, many good Muslims, etc., etc., they're under sort of pressure to have to prove they are. And so I think it's very important that if we go after the Islamic State, that we maintain this cohesion, and that we don't encourage buffheads in our community to lambaste, to exercise their free speech, according to Brandis, against Muslim schools. And I don't think, based on leading the news the other night with the story that an Australian serviceman had been threatened by a Muslim, something that the Australian serviceman going unnamed, the circumstances going unnamed, leading with a story like that, which the next day turns out to be horse feathers, is very sad indication that we're not doing enough to maintain that cohesion.
Yeah. So you're a known fan of Australia being a republic.
Yeah.
So I was just curious to get your thoughts on the recent vote for Scotland for their independence.
Yes, I was hoping they'd go through with it, but I can understand also why they didn't. Yeah, I mean, it was economic issues and the fact that enough Scots felt they had enough Scottish identity under the present system. And it's, as the Republican vote here showed, it's very hard to have success with a proposition which is adjusting an arrangement that hasn't broken down. A preferable arrangement, perhaps, but one that hasn't broken down. Some in my generation would say the relationship broke down between the monarchical system and the Australian polity when Gough Whitlam was sacked. But others don't believe that. And if you're going to lead people to an improvement, you can't have one side of politics sniping from the side and the other being in favour. It's an easy thing, sadly, to spread fear about a proposition. So if there is a future Republican proposal, and there will be eventually, it will require both heads of both parties to be in favour of it.
What do you think? How important do you think Australian literature is, which you've contributed a lot to Australian culture?
Oh, I think Australian writing is very important. It's hard to say in what sense. As soon as it's like Australian history. History is a transcendent thing, and it's very hard to weigh it up and say, this is how much it means to our economy, to our society, to the imagination of the people, to the publishing industry, etc. And writing's a bit the same, but you can tell from the passion with which people are willing to read it that it means a lot to them. You can't define what the benefits of literature are. That's why, you know, under the economies that have existed in the last 30 years and still prevail, it's very hard to defend the humanities on a cost per unit basis. But there are far more other important issues like civilization, the fact that the humanities civilize young people, and certainly to the extent I'm civilized, I've been civilized by the humanities. And I think Australian writing, as well as world writing, I think Australians want to have a passion to see their experience of the world reproduced in fictional form and in non-fiction and in history. I've noticed writing, I've got volume 3 of my Australians coming out, and people are passionate about reading stuff they didn't know had happened. For example, in the case of the 20s and 30s, people have forgotten how strong the private armies were that were in existence to put down any possible socialist uprising by the discontented of the Depression. So Australia was not a united country by any way. And people say when they read that, I never knew that. And it gives a new dimension to Australian life and politics.
Because you use history a lot. What do you think the importance is of using history to tell a story?
Well, I don't know. We've got over saying that the benefit of history is that If you read history, you won't repeat the same mistakes. Obviously, we're repeating the same mistakes again and again. So I think that the problem with history is it has many benefits in terms of narrative, of giving people a story that they cherish. Warts and all, it doesn't have to be white armband or black armband, it can be both. And I think that the benefits of history, though, are hugely civilizing, hugely important to the identity of a community, always being revised, always being rewritten, and people have a hunger for it because it's a dimension of who they are. So you can't say, you can take something like economics and say, or biology, and say, come and do this and you'll be able to get a job in a lab. Come and do this, you'll be able to get a job in a merchant bank. The benefits of history and literature are far more pervasive in a culture, and they're far more evasive they evade definition. And that's why they're so hard to defend. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming.
Not at all.